broadly speaking, what are the challenges faced by organizations who are serious about this conversation?
Think about language. So big challenge is language, right? So explore. One of the first things we do with our clients is really explore, what do you mean by equality? What does equality mean to you? What does diversity mean to you? What does inclusion? Yeah, and have really create a safe space. So our obviously organizations can do that in-house, but the skill we bring is creating a safe space in which those conversations can take place, because those are challenging conversations. You want to be able to have those conversations in a way that everybody can engage and not make the language exclusive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But also you want to come up with a shared language and visuals. So, one theatre we worked with, for example, we worked with their whole employee base. It was a mid-sized organization, 250 people. But really the commitment that the organization showed in having all those people share in the creation of those definitions, the definition of equality, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and do that in a sensitive way, in a way that was safe for everybody, whether they were an usher, a volunteer, or the chief exec. And obviously, if it's a larger organization, you're going to have to do that in chunks. You're going to have to do that. I start with the senior team and then roll it out. And even with the 250 person organization, we started with the senior team and rolled it out, but we did it in a way that everybody had a voice. So everybody has an input, because once you have an input, you start to feel like you have a sense of, yeah, I'm free to be myself. I belong here.
Sure,
right?
sure.
So the first step is really having conversations about language and giving people an opportunity to contribute. Then there are other elements you want to look at. You want to have conversations around privilege.
That I can imagine would be a very difficult conversation.
It is, and you need to really create a very safe space in which to have that conversation, right? And you want to look at
So can I ask you a very practical question then? It's going to be slightly controversial maybe for some people, but if you've got a group of leaders who happen to be all white people,
yeah,
let's say actually all white men, middle-aged, and then you're having a conversation about privilege.
yeah.
And then maybe also actually, how do you explore that question or that word amongst different generations? Because millennials will understand it very differently, perhaps to your 50 plus.
Yes. So what you need to do is really create the context of privilege, make it clear for people that actually it wasn't their choice to have privilege.
Yeah.
And I'm running through this very quickly, but essentially this is what we do. And we start to create a safe space. We also help people understand that every human being has privilege.
Yes.
And privilege is different with different people. And when they can start to own that, you can open up a conversation about what kinds of privilege do we have? How do we separate out the systemic elements of privilege from the individual elements? And how can we then advocate for inclusion and belonging? And a great example of this is a client that we've been working with the organization, and he was an acting CEO. So there were two CEOs, and he was a joint acting CEO. And it came to a point where that role had to be made permanent, because you can't continue to be acting, and it had to be advertised because of the regulations in the organization. And this is a person who's totally committed to inclusion and parity in his organization. And suddenly he was having to deal with the difficult question about, well, my co-CEO is a white man.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that I have to step down in order to forward our objectives as an organization? Do I have to sacrifice my position? Because, I quite like my job and I quite like the salary I'm earning and what that provides for my family. Do I have to step down in this instance?
Mm-hmm.
And if I step down in this instance, am I going to be faced with that whichever organization I go to? This is really deep, reflective conversations